Just what do you have to do when a queen decides she's going to pop in to see you, and not just any old queen? Victoria!
Like a pair of obsessed Victoria groupies, we're pursuing her around the country to the posh pads she visited.
We'll be delving into her personal diaries to reveal what happened behind closed doors. Today, Brighton Pavilion. It certainly is the most remarkable-looking building.
Like nothing else we've ever seen before on our journey.
And as someone who's spent a lifetime getting excited by antiques, I'll be upstairs exploring just what would have excited Victoria on her visit here.
Wow. Splendid.
And as a chef who's passionate about all sorts of food, I'll be going downstairs to the kitchen where I'll be rediscovering a super 19th century recipe that was served to Victoria.
Just have a little play with it. Go on.
That is ridiculous!
And see what Tim makes of my wobbly creations.
Oh, look at her face. Oh.
The 19-year-old Queen Victoria travelled from Windsor Castle to the Royal Pavilion on the 18th of December 1838, the year of her coronation. She was here for the festive holidays and stayed until the new year. In her diary, she tells us her 76-mile journey took 6 hours and they changed horses 5 times. The same journey today would take about an hour and a half.
So, here we are, Rosemary.
The Royal Pavilion. It was actually created by Victoria's uncle, King George IV, and it was completed some 18 years before her first visit. And he had some very queer ideas about architecture. Oh, yes. George, Victoria's spendthrift uncle, had the royal architect John Nash create this Indo-Chinese wedding cake of a building in the heart of town.
Well, you know, it was Christmas when Victoria visited Brighton in 1838.
You're right. Of course, she'd been the year before, but she'd never been here in the holiday period. And you know, I think that's really strange, Rosemary, because she's only been to the royal family seaside holiday residence the once. And I reckon it's to do with her uncle George IV. He was a profligate and wasteful man, and I think was desperately unpopular, and she didn't want to be tarnished by that brush. But now, with George long gone, and with the crown firmly on her head, perhaps it was time for a bit of a reappraisal. The unmarried teen queen decamped to Brighton with a small entourage of ladies-in-waiting and equerries. Her arrival created a right royal fuss and flim-flam. All the townspeople got into their Sunday best so that they could pay homage to their queen.
Well, I tell you, the servants' quarters must have been buzzing. They would have been a hive of activity. But that's exactly where I'm off to now, so I will see you later.
Very good luck, Rosemary.
For the 19-year-old Victoria, taking on the duties of a monarch at such a young age must have been overwhelming, to say the least. She distanced herself from her overbearing mother and had flown the nest, but she wasn't sampling the delights of student life. She was the queen! And just like Princess Diana in the 1980s, she suddenly found herself thrust into the limelight with millions of adoring fans.
OK, here we go.
Is it you from the TV? It is, isn't it?
I watch the programme every day it's on.
Yeah.
I'll watch it all the time.
Hold on, Annabelle, you keep at it, darling.
Yep, I will.
Right.
Can I have your autograph, please? My husband's a great fan of yours. Thank you very much.
Sure.
for your
What's your
programme.
husband called?
Malcolm.
Malcolm. Name, Georgia.
Can you take one of this?
Some take to the life of superstardom with ease. Ha ha. But for Victoria, it was less welcome. And despite being surrounded by people, she was in fact quite alone. Her diary entries paint a picture of a very young woman with no one to confide in. We believe her mother might have come with her to the pavilion, but she was the last person Victoria wanted to talk to. The new Queen had formed one close attachment to the Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, who was 3 times her age. She describes having to leave her dear friend behind at Windsor as very sad and implored him to visit. But at least the wacky pavilion building with its minarets and domes lifted Victoria's mood. Victoria wrote in her journal, "The pavilion lighted up, looked cheerful," which is always nice, particularly at Christmas time. On arrival, Victoria would have been ushered into this space, the Long Gallery. When she saw it first, she wrote, "This is a very strange, odd, Chinese-looking place." And she's absolutely right. Decorated in the chinoiserie style from sources that were various. She would be certain to have admired these exotic wall coverings. Not wallpaper, but hand-painted wall surfaces from the London firm of decorators Crace & Co., most particularly Frederick Crace. He actually had been no further east than Dover. All the cunning fellow did was to copy designs from those classic blue and white vases. I wonder if Her Majesty noticed. For Saturn, she would have been amused by these fellows. It's an attendant with a counterweight within this articulated neck that enables his head to nod. But it doesn't come from the Orient, it comes from that other very well-known China region, Stoke-on-Trent.
Now, just because this is a holiday home doesn't mean the servants had an easy time. They mothballed the pavilion between each royal visit, so preparing for Victoria was no small task. The pavilion staff increased from around 25 to over 200 during the run-up to her visit. I can imagine maids and footmen hurrying along these long corridors, which kept the servants out of sight. Heaven help a housemaid who went through the wrong door or burst into the wrong room. Our food historian, Ivan Day, has already found his way to these extraordinary kitchens, and he couldn't be happier.
To my mind, this is the most wonderful kitchen in Europe, full stop. It was designed by Nash, and he was an architect who really knew what a kitchen had to do. First of all, you need lots of light, so he's got this wonderful lantern which just floods the whole room with superb clear light so you can see what you're doing. Every part of the kitchen is dedicated to a particular task. So over there, you see the roasting range. Behind us, we've got the stewing stoves where the finer cookery was done, the sauces, the stock pots, and the consommé pots for making soups. And on the dressers, you've got this extraordinary batterie de cuisine of the most wonderful stew pans and saucepans and fish kettles. A lot of this equipment, I think, would probably survive a direct nuclear attack. It's so heavily engineered. It's typically 19th century.
Yes.
And then over there is my favourite part of the kitchen. You've got these wonderful culinary moulds. Some are for making cakes, but some are making that iconic food of the 19th century, which is jelly.
And that's what we're going to make today. A wonderful champagne jelly that would have graced every posh table in Queen Victoria's time. And we'll also be taking a look at the commemorative side of these comical puddings.
During the Queen's 3-week visit, extra dosh was forked out to boost staff numbers downstairs, but before she arrived, even more cash had been splashed out preparing the pavilion for Victoria. With all this bling, it's more like a rapper's delight than a royal palace. £4,000 was blown on tarting the place up. That's over £150,000 in today's money. Quite a sum for just a bit of a spruce up of what was, after all, a holiday home. Even one as architecturally sophisticated as this. The extreme length of the Long Gallery, some 160 feet, coupled with the relatively low ceilings, serve as an architectural conceit. You don't realise it, but you're being drawn into this funnel, a modest doorway at the end of the gallery that prepares your eye for the next treat. Wow. Bizarre or what? The dominant feature for me has to be the dome. That's been painted with plantain or banana leaves, as if nodding towards the empire in the east. Underneath the leaves, we've got a ventilation system acting like a chimney that takes away the heat and the smells. Victoria didn't think much of it, because she complained the pavilion was either always too hot or too cold. I wonder if this crazy dragon's den of a dining room affected her appetite at all, and not in a good way. You have to hope I'm wrong. After all, she must have eaten around 20 huge meals here in the run-up to Christmas. And as for Christmas dinner itself, the young Queen Victoria would not have been sitting down to turkey and Brussels sprouts. Oh no, she would have been served up to 7 courses of over 30 dishes. And never mind the wines. And the cuisine wasn't English, but French, as was the fashion at the grandest of tables. As Victoria sat here, wading her way through many exotic and over-decorated courses that went to make up her Christmas meals, you can almost imagine her looking down her refined little nose rather contemptuously at this opulent scene.
It's quite a contrast to the simple, functional kitchen where all the elaborate food would have been prepared, including the dish we're making today, a champagne jelly. Jellies had taken a feverish hold in the 19th century, often being used as the crowning glory for the Victorian table. The reason for this growth in popularity was partially due to the advances in moulds, and our jelly uses a particularly clever mould.
This is known as a Belgrave mould. I've got 2 here, an oval one and a round one which is on the ice. Now, what makes them special is that they have these extraordinary liners with these spiral tubes. These moulds first came into use in the 19th century, and the idea is this. We put them into the mould and we fill it up with jelly, and we let the jelly set. Then, what we then do is to fill these up with warm water and screw them out. But this is what I mean by engineering, because if you look, there's a tiny hole at the bottom. And from that hole runs a tube. Can you see the tube?
Yes.
Now, when we screw it out, if it didn't have that air release, it wouldn't come out.
You couldn't get it out.
So as you screw it out, the air goes down the hole into the cavity. So this is really going to be a heavily engineered jelly.
Yes. It originated in Victoria's Uncle George's kitchen when he was Prince Regent.
So is this something that Victoria would have eaten herself?
This was one of the most popular jellies of the 19th century. And she would have, I'm sure, had it a number of times. It was so famous and so popular.
It contains pink champagne, a drop of orange flower water, some sugar syrup and a gelling agent.
I've got 1.5 pints. It's a quart mould, so if I put 1.5 pints of the mixture in...
Because it'll obviously come up because of pushing this in.
If you now
Can
pop
I put it
them
in?
yes.
OK, this is very exciting. So we're going to pop it down very carefully.
Perfect.
It's got a hinge either side.
Yeah, that locks it exactly into position.
Yes.
So the tubes are directly above the little features at the bottom. Now, that's it. All we do now is we just leave it for an hour or so on the ice.
Right.
And then we go on to the next stage.
I'll be finishing the jelly later. I can't wait.
While below stairs is all of a quiver, upstairs is all of a sparkle. One of the most delightful and ingenious aspects of the pavilion is the clever interplay of light on interior decoration. Queen Victoria was particularly taken by this, and she writes in her journal, "The whole pavilion has been done up and re-gilt and looks very fresh and pretty, an effect that I can assure you would have taken many thousands of man-hours." This wildly over-the-top gilding, which is such a huge feature of the pavilion, seems rather odd for a holiday home by the sea, but then there's no accounting for royal taste. Or lack of it. The gilding was particularly effective when hit by hard shafts of light striking these cunning horizontal slitty windows which are set about all the domes above the principal reception rooms, i.e. the banqueting hall, the music room and the saloon. The magical lighting effects inside continued even after dark, because servants would come out, rain or shine, winter or summer, after dark, and light great gas lamps outside these windows, creating effectively more daylight to come through the glass and transform and enhance the experience within.
Now, I'm escaping the guilt and the gaudiness for an exciting exploration of the pavilion's downstairs world. Or should that be upstairs? Curator David Beavers is taking me to see one of the most extraordinary rooms in the house, usually off-limits to the public. This had better be worth it. 56, 57, 8...
David, that's a long way up.
It is, isn't it? Yes.
Well, where are we now? Where have you brought me up to?
It's an area of the pavilion that the public don't come to called the Bottle, and it's a wonderfully evocative area. And in the past, as you can see, people have come up here rather unauthorised. And here's somebody called Priscilla Davidson, an early one, who was here in August 1879.
1879, that's fantastic. So, tell me, what was this used for?
Well, it was originally intended, we think, for a billiard room, but hauling a billiard table up here was rather ridiculous. And so very soon it became servants' quarters.
Really?
Well, yes, and these were valets' quarters.
It wasn't just the servants who were able to enjoy this room with a view. Victoria herself came up here on the night she arrived.
Because Victoria does say that she watched fireworks.
It's a lovely thought, isn't it? Victoria standing about where you are,
yes.
Looking out of the window there over the Steam and seeing fireworks in her honour.
She must have loved it, actually. She must have had quite a sort of jolly time
I'm
up
sure
here.
she did, yes.
Yes.
I'm sure she did, yes.
It's so unique and it's so odd.
It's not been touched. It's got its
quirky.
1830s wallpaper, it's got graining on the doors that's all original. So it's an untouched part of the pavilion, and it's very evocative, I think.
But when Victoria wasn't in the mood for jolly times or the garish interiors had got the better of her, she'd retire here to her own private apartments. Interestingly, the decor is much plainer than the rest of the house, we think at her request. Perhaps it's an early sign of the serious side of the young Queen. This is borne out by her diary, in which she tells us she was reading Oliver Twist and is clearly intrigued by the descriptions of squalid vice, starvation and workhouses. Victoria asked her trusted Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, who arrived on Boxing Day, if such things were true. He replied that in many schools they give children the worst things to eat and bad beer to save expense. There you are, no Jamie Oliver.
Of course, for the 19-year-old Queen, the contrast with her own life was huge. She only had to sneeze, and a maid would come running. Indeed, here next to Her Majesty's bedroom is the wardrobe maid's room. She was one of the upper servants who had direct contact with the Queen. 4 other dressers lived in tiny rooms above the main bedroom, and they were also expected to be at her beck and call 24/7. Talking of staff, how is my manservant doing downstairs?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the big one in the middle and fill it with warm water. And that will melt the jelly around it and will enable me to release it. So I can immediately start screwing it out of the jelly. Remember, it's a spiral, and it just comes out of the jelly like a screw.
Clever is that?
Like that. Leaving a cavity. We've now got to very carefully fill the smaller ones with warm water and very carefully twist those out. And we can tear the wall if there's a very small gap between the big one and the small one. What I'm worried about is this collapsing. It makes my hair stand on end, actually, when I do this in this kitchen, because I get the feeling this was such a popular mould in its day that I'm sure this has been done in this space before. It sends a shiver up my spine to do it. It really does. It's an extraordinary thing of bringing history to life through food. This is one of those things that we forget. These people had incredible skill, and they were working in kitchens without electricity, without refrigeration, and they could do things that modern restaurant chefs cannot do, with very limited technology. So finally, there we are, they're all done. All we need to do now, Rosemary, is for you to fill them with the orange flower flavoured...
Shall I start in the middle
Start
first?
in the big one.
That makes sense. I've got to be very steady.
The blancmange is poured into the cavities in the jelly, making a fab two-toned effect when the diner cuts through, if I can keep a steady hand. Despite the kitchen being cutting edge for its time, there were no fancy fridges for the chefs at the pavilion, but there were other ways of keeping things cool.
Well, that's all done. I'll put it on the ice. You go and put it in the larder, and that's finished.
While she was staying at the pavilion for Christmas, the young queen occupied herself in a variety of ways. Once she'd been dressed and her hair had been done, she'd play music, try her hand at lace making, receive dispatches and letters. As she tells us in her journal, after dawdling about for quite some time, I received a long letter from the Queen Dowager from Malta and one from Lady Normanby. She also loved to read, but more than any of the above, it seems, she loved to ride. Throughout her visit, Victoria tells us that she adored riding out along the south coast. The stables are situated across the garden at the back of the pavilion, underneath that magnificent dome. She writes in her diary of days spent riding along the cliffs. I got on Midnight, who I like very much. His trot is charming, and I like his gallop very much too. Brighton must have been enthralled by such a spectacle. It was quite something seeing the tiny queen hoofing it towards you on a majestic steed. Giddy up!
While we're waiting for our special champagne jelly to set, Ivan is giving me the lowdown on other jellies, starting with those made popular by Victoria's Uncle George and still around during her reign. First, how to get the blighters out of their moulds.
Now, to get this one out, you have to give it a really good shake and get the air right up. And you get it right in the middle.
It's like a cone to me.
Let's see if it comes out. It's come out perfectly. But this particular jelly will misbehave in a way...
Just put it down.
It's quite remarkable, isn't it? I mean,
that is ridiculous.
Just have a little play with it. Go on. Get it moving. Well, not too fierce. You'll see it'll auto-destruct if you move it around too much. Now, for me, this says everything about the Prince Regent, really. This is his style of jelly. It's absolutely...
He was a naughty boy.
Well, they just must have burst
funny.
their britches.
Do you think Victoria would have loved that too? Would she have seen the humour?
I think, actually, this was something she would have disapproved on. These are really the age of Victoria's childhood, and she disapproved of her Uncle George and all of the other naughty
He was
princes.
a naughty boy, wasn't he?
They all were, yes.
Imagine the tension in the kitchen if HRH was upstairs, especially when things don't always go according to plan.
It's going. Now, these sometimes take a little bit of time. Here we go. Oh, no.
Oh, no.
No, that one's a miserable failure.
And when serving royalty, there's no room for error.
Yeah, OK. So, basically, I've got to just find where it goes and put it on.
They weren't just there for their comic value. During Queen Victoria's reign, jellies were often commemorative. This one, made later in Victoria's reign, features the Brunswick star that her son Edward, Prince of Wales, wore. And this Danish flag in a jelly represented his Danish wife, Princess Alexandra. It's a his and hers pudding. Today, we'd use a few cubes of jelly set in a mixing bowl, but these creations were far more elaborate. Even this milk jelly was carefully flavoured with almond and rose water and coloured with strawberry and black currant juice. They got totally carried away with these wobbly wonders. I can see the attraction. All we have to do now is get our champagne jelly out in one piece. No pressure then. My heart's in my mouth.
So, okay. Now, sometimes you get wonderful gurgling noises. So
Okay.
just let's be quiet and just listen to a sound of Victorian jelly coming out of the mould.
Oh, it's just a treat to behold. It really is. This, I think, is a little gem.
It's wonderful, isn't
It's a
it?
real gem. I can't wait to see what it tastes like.
Remind you of anything? Maybe the jellies had brought a smile to Victoria's face. As it seems from her diary, she was rather enjoying her visit. She describes staying up very late, having amusing evenings. Until Christmas Day arrived, when she moans in her diary that she went to chapel and was rather unimpressed with the sermon delivered by the Bishop of Chichester. She states it was rather slow, but it seems things improved as the day went on. She says dinner was a lively affair with 20 assembled nobles and dignitaries who were agreeable, amusing and animated. All in all, from her diary entries, Victoria enjoyed her visit to Brighton, and it seems she's not the only one.
Well, Rosemary, it looks to me as if you've had a quiveringly good day.
Tim, it's an engineering feat. It is so exciting, I can't tell you. And it's made with champagne, pink champagne, and orange flower.
Yum, yum. Can I have it now?
Yes, you can have it, but you're going to have to help yourself. So what I think we should do is we should go around the outside and then just take a little bit.
This is difficult to control, Rosemary.
Oh, well.
Oh, my God. I've had a complete collapse here.
No, it won't stand up. Oh.
I'm not going to get that standing out. I'm going to get my napkin out, though,
No.
before I start dribbling.
Oh.
Oh, look at her face. It's just oh, look at that.
That is delicious. To me, this is just an extravaganza on the table. It's wonderful. And actually, I think that this goes with the pavilion because this is so over the top. Everything's over the top. It's extraordinary.
Well, that's quite something, I have to say. More jelly, Vicar?
Absolutely.
Despite her overblown surroundings and light-hearted puddings, Victoria's New Year resolution, written in her diary, reveals a young queen who was far from frivolous.
A teenager who clearly took the job seriously. She says, Almighty God, preserve me safely through this year and make me daily more fit for my station.
Victoria's and our time at Brighton may be at an end, but join us next time when our journey continues to Scone on the east coast of Scotland.
Which has a very different flavour.
Oh, you're right there, Pet.